One of the biggest questions I had leading up to chapter 4 was what happened to Kissy Missy. After all, she played a pretty significant role in chapter 3. Well, we finally got some answers, including a few details about her past. So with that being said, let's uncover everything we can about Kissy Missy's story in chapter 4. By now, everyone knows what happened at the end of chapter 3, so I won't spend too much time talking about it, but I need to point out a few details. We head down with Poppy and leave Kissy to pull the lever. The plan was, once we were down, Poppy would go back up for Kissy. However, as we are descending, we hear screaming and Kissy gets attacked. Therefore, we don't really know who or what attacked her, but the screaming is important, so keep it in mind. This brings us to the beginning of chapter 4. While on the elevator, Poppy tells us to go on without her, so she can go back and help Kissy. She won't leave her behind. I think it's important to note here the relationship Poppy and Kissy have. They've seemed to stay together after all these years, and no matter what, they always protect each other. Obviously excluding when Poppy was in her case. A true friendship to say the least. However, this friendship will be tested later on. Now, while navigating through the prison, inside one of the cells is a weekly checkup for experiment 1172, otherwise thought to be Kissy Missy. This is obviously not confirmed, but the checkup heavily hints at it being Kissy. I mean, Huggy Wuggy was experiment 1170, so it would make sense for Kissy to be 1172. Now, this does mean there was a 1171, another version of Kissy perhaps? Who knows? As I was saying, this checkup shows improvement for Kissy. It states the reason for observation: emotional dysregulation, overactive autonomic nervous system, meaning an acute response to stress, as well as episodes consisting of shaking, heavy breathing, and decreased concentration. In other words, Kissy was extremely skittish. Her report states when she was given writing implements, she communicated high levels of stress, feeling impending doom, and a strong desire to return to her previous living quarters. These are all things we have seen through Kissy Missy's body language throughout the chapters. She always looks nervous and scared. It's as if she doesn't want to be there anymore. Considering how she acted, it seemed 1172 was ultimately useless if she couldn't complete her assigned tasks. However, she had shown gradual but steady improvements. The staff noticed a drop in the number of emotional episodes, as well as a shortened duration when they do occur. Kissy was becoming more stable. One factor for this improvement was because of scheduled periods of supervised socialization with other subjects. This measure was personally requested by Stella Graber, and had positive impacts on not only Kissy, but several other subjects. Who would have thought that not being alone all the time would have a positive mental result? Remember, these experiments are people too, and humans are social beings. I think this is an example of how Playtime Co. doesn't see them as such. To the company, these experiments are objects. They don't care about how they feel. If one of them shows negative results, they just throw them away. However, it's good to know that there was at least one good person amongst the staff, as I would say Stella was one of the only staff members that saw the experiments as real people.
I took this job because I wanted to help change kids' lives for the better. Of course, these procedures are far from ideal. I cried like a baby when I read them. But I started looking past the here and now. Started looking down the road a bit. And that's when it clicked. What your researchers can do down here will someday help a lot of people out there, including so many kids. That's a bigger and better change than I could ever have hoped to make. That's a change I want to help make.
I knew you'd understand.
And this act from her proves that. It notes that 1172 would rub the fur on her arms, most likely unconsciously in response to stress. Of course, we have seen this before from Kissy. The report concludes that if 1172 continues to improve, she will not need corrective intervention. In other words, will not need to be experimented on anymore. While still reporting negative feelings, she was back to a fully functional state. Staff recommended she do physical work in a quiet setting. So this report tells us that Kissy had always been in a state of distress. I mean, I can't really blame her. It makes you wonder if the orphan she once was acted like this as well. At this point, we still don't know what happened to Kissy after her attack. We haven't seen or heard from Poppy. However, on our way to Safe Haven, Kissy grabs us and pulls us into a crack in the wall, which completely catches us off guard. This reveals that she did in fact survive, although she is pretty beat up, but I will talk about this more in a moment. Poppy tells us to stay quiet as the prototype walks by. After he passes, the three of us safely make it to Safe Haven. Now, following Doey and Poppy's conversation, it's implied that the prototype was the one who actually attacked Kissy Missy at the end of chapter 3. The screaming we heard from her was not the attacker, it was actually Kissy herself, which makes sense because her screaming is similar to Huggy Wuggy's. When Poppy went back up to help Kissy, the prototype followed them down to Safe Haven. This explains why they were hiding in the wall. It was because the prototype was following them. This is further suggested when Doey gets upset, pointing out that Poppy brought the prototype down here. So to answer the question of who attacked Kissy Missy, it was the prototype. After taking out Catnap, it seemed the prototype wanted to take matters into his own hands, but he wasn't fast enough as Kissy was the only one still above. Now, as we can see, Kissy Missy is very beat up. She's wearing an arm splint, something that helps broken bones, which is kind of weird considering the way her arm can bend. I don't think there are bones in there, but who knows. She also looks to be burnt. This could hint that the prototype has some kind of flamethrower attachment built onto him, or she is just very dirty and scraped up after being presumably thrown around. Either way, she is in a very bad state and needs to rest to heal, which kind of reveals that the experiments are able to heal themselves like a normal human body would. So Kissy sits down in a makeshift bed to get some rest. Here, Poppy tells us about her plan, and I bring it up because she plans to stop the prototype, but at the cost of all the other experiments' lives. However, she mentions keeping Kissy alive. Another example of their friendship, and like I said before, this friendship will be tested as we reach the end of the chapter. At some point after Kissy felt better, her and Poppy left Safe Haven together. We know this because when we return later, the place is destroyed and the other toys are dead. Now, we actually run into the two sitting in a ventilation block while Poppy is trying to contact Ollie, rather the prototype. During the conversation with Poppy and the prototype, it's important to pay attention to Kissy's body language. She sits relaxed at first, and when the prototype reveals himself to be Ollie, she leans back in fear and begins to shake. Just the sound of the prototype's voice makes Kissy fearful. This shaking is a trait we saw in her weekly checkup, another example of her being experiment 1172. She then puts herself in a sort of fetal position, which is a direct response to fear. When faced with extreme stress, our bodies naturally resort to this self-soothing fetal position. In other words, we are trying to make ourselves as small as possible to hide, and we see this in Kissy as she continues to bunch herself up. But when Poppy begins to cry, Kissy actually opens up and gets a little closer to Poppy. This is Kissy's fight or flight response. She senses her friend is in distress, which causes her to gain courage and want to help, even if it's only by a small amount. She continues to watch Poppy in concern when Poppy suddenly runs away. She was so afraid of returning to her case that she seemed to abandon her friend, a friend that would do anything for her. This is what I was talking about when questioning their friendship. Why would Poppy abandon Kissy like this when she went back to save her life earlier? The prototype even mentions Poppy being a bad friend for leaving. I guess the fear of being in the case was enough for Poppy to lose it. So I'm not sure, but considering how close they are, it's an interesting detail to think about. Suddenly, the explosives go off. Kissy grabs us, however we are too heavy for her newly injured arm as it rips off and we fall down. You'll notice that she didn't actually fall though, meaning Kissy Missy is very much still alive, and will return in chapter 5. We can assume she is going to go back and find Poppy as a true friend would. This is where Kissy Missy's story in chapter 4 comes to an end. I think it's important to note that Kissy has always been a friendly character not only to Poppy, but to us. She helped us in almost every chapter now, and you could even say she saved our life in chapter 4. She is always anxious and scared. She just wants her life back, just like all of the other experiments. It makes me wonder if she is going to survive as the story continues, but I don't think she will. I think her story will be an example of the many orphans that lost their lives to Playtime Co., regardless of how nice and caring they were. Kissy is a truly good soul, and as the story continues, that soul will be ripped away. How do you guys feel about Kissy Missy? She's one of my favorite characters, even though she's never said a word. There is still a lot to be said about her character and her friendship with Poppy, but that'll be for another video after her story is complete. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like horror game content like this, please consider subscribing. Also, I just made a Discord server, so if you want to chat with me, I recommend joining. And if you want to support the channel, you can become a member. Don't forget to follow my Twitter at TerrifyT. Thanks for watching.